Hello, everybody. Welcome to the world's greatest Bronze Age Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I am your co-host, Mike L, and as always, I'm joined by...
Joshua Mervell. Today we're going to be looking at Spidey comics from February of 1984.
That's right, and we also would like to welcome back a recurring special guest, G.I. Jolie.
Hi.
And for the very first time ever, we have a very special guest who's been on the Comic Book Syndicate a few times and used to be part of the Comic Book Syndicate crew, and he wrote and recorded the Comic Book Syndicate theme song, Phil Primrell.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Phil, just to be clear, I know that you didn't grow up reading comics the way I did, but in the more recent years, you've gotten into reading graphic novels, right?
Yeah, and particularly since this whole shutdown COVID style. Yeah, absolutely.
Really? Can you give us a couple highlights, like maybe 2 or 3 really good ones that you've come across?
Recently, I don't know, just very recently, looking through the list here, I read Superman Birthright, this really cool comic called This One Summer by Mariko Tamaki.
Oh, yeah, we've read that. It was really good, eh?
Yeah, it was really good. Really good. For a younger audience, but like really well written, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I started, because I'm trying to like catch up on old stuff, so this was really cool actually to be invited to this, because this is obviously older, these ones that we're looking at, but so I started reading Grant Morrison's run of New X-Men, which is pretty sweet. Yeah. I've been catching up on like Scott Snyder's run of Batman forever and ever. I just finished the 4th volume there, so yeah, I don't know. I've just been like trying to get in as much as I possibly can in the last little while, and you know, it's great being at home and, you know, having a little bit of extra time. So yeah, it's been great.
That's very cool. I'm a fan of all of those, actually, so that's cool. So yeah, so this is obviously the era of Spider-Man that I grew up in. Josh grew up reading 90s Spidey, and Jolie didn't really read much Spidey until we started doing this podcast, so we're all coming from completely different perspectives. So Phil, have you ever read any Spider-Man comics before this week?
I did as a kid, and it was on my list of stuff to get back into, but I mean, not recently. Not any time recently, that's for sure.
Interesting. Okay, so obviously at this time, Spider-Man has always been popular, but it was probably the second best-selling title for Marvel at this point. Amazing Spider-Man was. X-Men would have been number 1, but Amazing Spider-Man was right up there. And this was during a sort of a resurgence in his popularity. Roger Stern is a really, you know, well-regarded writer in Spider-Man's history. And this was during the heyday of the Hobgoblin mystery. And I thought everyone on Earth was excited about the Hobgoblin was me, but apparently Bex Luthor doesn't give 2 shits about the Hobgoblin. But that's okay. Not everyone likes the Hobgoblin. but during these 4 years, it was an ongoing mystery of who the Hobgoblin was, right? And so Roger Stern was keeping everybody guessing. But unfortunately, what happened was the issue that we're about to talk about was the beginning of his swan song. So he did this 3-parter, and then he left, and then 1 or 2 years later, a different writer revealed the identity of the Hobgoblin, but it was different from what Roger Stern intended. So years later, he had to come back and do his version of the story. But for now, this is our, you know, last official big Hobgoblin story, part 1 at least. So we're going to quickly talk about this one. So this is Amazing Spider-Man 249. Like we said, it's written by Roger Stern. It's drawn by John Romita Jr., inked by Dan Green. And we open up with a scene, you know, the everyman, Peter Parker, having a gorgeous girl in a bikini walk in on him while he's changing. I mean, this happens to me practically twice a week, so I can relate to this.
And always in a darkened cottage room in the suburbs.
Right. But he basically, is it shush? No, not shushes her out. Shushes her out. What is it called when you get someone out of your room?
Shoes, I think.
Shoes.
Whatever.
Yeah.
He shoos her out. And then he's at this. He goes to this pool party. He's hanging out, and then Harry Osborn and Liz Osborn show up. Then Mary Jane shows up, and it's sort of this ongoing plot where everyone's trying to get Mary Jane back together. They're still obviously close friends, which is cool. So that's going on. We have a reference to the fact that Peter's spider sense has been acting wonky lately. In a previous story, Hobgoblin had used some kind of gas on him that dulled his spider sense. In this story, he kind of casually mentions it, but he's also, blah blah blah, mentioning that he had proposed to Mary Jane and she had turned him down, and blah. That was years ago though. So anyway, we cut over to J. Jonah Jameson, and again we get Roger Stern referring back to old '60s Spider-Man continuity, where J. Jonah Jameson brings up an old story where he actually financed the Scorpion. What's the Scorpion's real name? Mac Gargan, getting genetically experimented on to turn into the Scorpion. And so now someone is blackmailing him and threatening to reveal this information to the public. And so J. Jonah Jameson's trying to figure out what to do with this. We cut over to another scene, and Harry Osborn is also getting letters from presumably the same person, basically threatening him. Now, this is where I was a little bit confused because I couldn't remember, because just so the listener knows, so Harry Osborn's father, Norman Osborn, was the Green Goblin. Harry Osborn also became the Green Goblin, but then he, of course, bumped his head and forgot everything. In this story, he does remember, but I don't remember if there's a specific point where he says he suddenly remembered or he always remembered. But he does remember now that Norman Osborn was the Hobgoblin, or the Green Goblin, right?
Yeah, I think it's also mentioned here that he wishes that those memories didn't come back. So I think that I think that he actually did have some sort of memory loss, and then they slowly started to come back to normal. So
sure.
Yeah, I don't remember a specific time in the comics where he kind of snapped back to reality, but he's I guess slowly maybe just started realizing what had happened.
Sure. So yeah, so of course we get this flashback to the classic Amazing Spider-Man 121, 122, the death of Gwen Stacy followed by the death of Green Goblin, and Peter and Harry are best friends, so Peter's assuring him he's going to help him out with whatever goes on. So then we get this very cool scene where Harry Osborn brings Peter to this prestigious, nightclub in New York, members only, and they go in, and the first person they see sitting there is the kingpin of crime, Wilson Fisk, with a couple of his buddies. But it's interesting because at this point, Harry Osborn doesn't even realize that this guy's a criminal. He's just heard rumors about it, whereas all Marvel readers know this is basically like the Godfather of the Marvel Universe, right? We see a few other familiar faces come in. Somebody named Mr. Vandergill. Another person named Mr. Kingsley. Josh, do you recall a Roderick Kingsley from previous stories?
I do, yes.
Yes, because Roderick Kingsley was introduced in the first Roger Stern arc in Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, right? You remember that, right? And I don't know if I should spoil this for you, Phil, but Roderick Kingsley is the Hobgoblin, okay?
Oh.
He is revealed to be the Hobgoblin later on by Roger Stern, but at this point, Roger Stern is still playing games with the reader, right? So, and I'm not even sure if it's entirely consistent in this story, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So the second gentleman on the right on original page 12, that's Roderick Kingsley. According to Roger Stern, that's the Hobgoblin. So everyone's sitting down, they're chatting back and forth, and next thing you know, J. Jonah Jameson shows up. And so what they basically figured out is that everyone who's been blackmailed by this mysterious person has been gathered together in this one room. And so everyone's glaring at Harry Osborn because they assume that he's the one that's blackmailing them. But then all of a sudden, we get this stage with this big red curtain that opens up, revealing the Hobgoblin sitting on stage there. And and so basically, he's just telling them all how it's going to be. He's going to be in charge of everything now. Peter Parker has left the room, changed into Spider-Man, and now he's kind of listening in through like an air duct grate thing up on the wall there.
Well, luckily for the plot line, he was never actually allowed in the room.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yes, that's true. Sorry, he didn't actually leave the room. Yeah, he wasn't allowed in, so it was very convenient for him to just come back in as Spider-Man. So anyway, then Harry Osborn gets tough with Hobgoblin, and he ends up punching him in the face, but turns out this is actually a robot, right? So he gets knocked over, and now look, who's the first person that reacts? It's Roderick Kingsley. Then the Hobgoblin could be anywhere. He could even be one of us, Roger Stern, we love you. Anyway, so anyway, but then wait a minute, what's going on here? Then all of a sudden the Hobgoblin smashes through the window, right, and starts attacking Harry Osborn. But Spidey comes in to protect Harry. So they're fighting back and forth. We get a great fight scene with the pumpkin bombs and everything going off. Kingpin's goons want to jump in, but Kingpin stops them because he's like, we're in no immediate danger back here. I wish to observe this Hobgoblin. So Spider-Man somehow has fashioned a baseball bat made out of webs and a stick, I think, and he's trying to bat away these pumpkin bombs. So it's not quite working. So just as Spider-Man's almost knocked unconscious, he pulls out one of his spider tracers, which, as everyone knows, he uses his spider sense to trace people with, right? So he's about to drop it on the Hobgoblin, but he gets knocked unconscious. Then Hobgoblin's about to zap him, but this big metal like serving tray comes up to protect him, and it turns out it's the Kingpin that's actually protecting Spider-Man. And so then so Hobgoblin has words with Kingpin, takes off, and then just as he's flying away, the Kingpin throws a spider tracer on him. And of course, Kingpin is always working behind the scenes. He's always got a bigger plan in mind, right? So he's basically hoping that Spider-Man can track him down and take care of him. But then in his head, Spider-Man's like, oh no. He's like, I need my spider sense to track down my tracer bug. And thanks to Hobgoblin's new improved gas, my spider sense is totally gone. Maybe for good. And that is our cliffhanger, folks. Next issue, Confessions. And so, because Phil is our special guest, Phil, I just want to ask you, first of all, what do you know about the Hobgoblin? Are you familiar with him at all?
Only what you've basically touched upon. That's basically it, right? I always thought that that him and the Green Goblin were related, and for some reason I thought that the Green Goblin's son actually became the Hobgoblin at some point. This is, of course, I'm trying to relate this to my memories of being 7 years old or whatever it was when I read this last.
Okay. So yeah, Harry Osborn was Green Goblin 2, then there was another Green Goblin, but this was the kind of like a legacy version of Green Goblin with a different character, a different guy behind the mask, but he has been breaking into the Green Goblin's old secret hideouts and stealing his equipment and stealing his secret formula and all that stuff. So, so just tell us then, what's your first general impression of this issue?
Well, first of all, I want to ask, I looked it up, and it said in the link that you sent me, it said that this was done in 1963. Is that right, or is that completely wrong?
No, see, they put the year of the volume, because Marvel reboots their numbering every year now because they're idiots. And so the only way to keep track of each volume is to say, if you were to read Superman Volume 1, it's Superman 1940, and then the number. So the number is 605 or whatever.
Sure.
But they have to put the year that it began publication. So this story is actually from 1984.
Oh, okay. Because, the first thing that struck me about it was, first of all, the artwork, which I thought was just amazing. I love that sort of classic feel. It reminds me of what Warhol was trying to capture when he was talking about pop as art. It's exactly what I think of when I think of old school, drawings and the way that the panels work. It's beautiful, just beautiful.
Right.
And then of course not only did I see the date, but then too they opened up with that party scene at the pool. And a lot of the language just seemed very pulpy to me, which
sure.
I totally thought it was written back in the 60s. I could almost hear the bossa nova just twinkling in the background, as they're partying along and drinking their drinks, and not to mention the reference to Alan Alda. Who would reference Alan Alda in the 1980s? You know what I mean?
Right.
I guess you could. He was still a big star, but you'd probably reference him more in the 60s, right?
Right.
So, anyway, yeah, I thought the story was really good. It's funny the way the writer chose to kind of break down how everything develops. He tends to repeat the point over and over across every panel. So he'll have, say for instance, Peter's thoughts about something, and then he'll have the crowd's thoughts about something, and then there'll be sort of a narrator that comes in and then reiterates those thoughts about that exact same thing. And I feel like he could have packed in more action or more nuance or something along those lines if he didn't keep repeating those same beats throughout the entire work. You know what I mean?
Interesting. G.I. Jolie, did you feel any of that, or did you have a different impression?
I don't know. I guess I really didn't think of it in the same way. Mostly because I've been reading issues. Is the word concurrently?
Yeah. I guess. Yeah.
It definitely felt like an in-between, but still fully plotted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, Phil. What you're saying, you might, if you were to read every Roger Stern story, you might say the same thing about everything he does. In fact, you might say that about every '80s Marvel comic or every '80s comic, right? I think that's one criticism of comics from these days is they tend to repeat the same thing in the dialogue, the narration, and the art. They really hit you over the head.
Right.
Yeah, Josh, what do you think? I mean, have you noticed that, or is that?
Yeah, I feel like that feels like a consistent thing throughout. I think that my favorite comics are the ones that let the art do the talking. They don't have to like describe step by step what's happening. Like we can, we're reading the comic, we can see what's happening. So like that constant kind of like narration and having to describe what's happening in the comic does get tiring, but it definitely is something that is really common and seen in pretty much every comic from this era.
Right.
So it's hard to kind of judge it solely on that, because that's just kind of what comics were in 1984. So it's definitely not my favorite to constantly see it, and that's something that I'm excited to see kind of a change in that. But to me, I didn't actually notice it a whole lot in this issue, but I think that's just because every single week I read 3 of these, right? So to me, it didn't stand out a whole lot.
No.
Yeah, I imagine to all of you older comic book readers, like this is something that you've grown accustomed to or whatever, right? Like I'm coming at this with very new eyes, not to mention very modern eyes. Like even some of the comics that I just mentioned that I've been reading lately, you know, the newer ones particularly, you know, they leave a lot to the imagination, and they don't kind of they don't go into one point, you know, several times throughout the panels. Yeah.
I agree, and I think that's stronger storytelling to be able to do that.
I agree. Yeah, it's definitely grown as an art form for sure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, to me, it's more like I'm very familiar with this one summer book that you had mentioned previously, and to me, it's like a growth of the medium being like maybe a little more sophisticated in its respect for dialogue and pictures together.
Yeah, for sure.
Not to say that this is disrespectful, it's just not what's done now, or if it is, it's antiquated.
For sure.
Well, so now as far as the plot goes, I personally, I loved this whole bit with getting everybody together in one room. I thought it was great, and then seeing the Kingpin sitting there. I mean, it's not really something I've seen in a Spider-Man comic. Phil, did that strike you at all? Like, did you like that scene?
Yeah, I thought it was a great way to bring everybody together and kind of build up, like especially now that you've revealed that the guy was in the room. That's a really awesome way to bring it in and you know, kind of reveal it. That's the word I'm looking for. Reveal it to the audience, right?
Right.
And the
of course, again,
for that matter.
Yeah. I don't know if it's necessarily consistent because, like I said, Roderick Kingsley is standing there saying he could even be one of us, and then the next shot he's coming to the window. Unless there's a 17-minute gap between those two panels, it doesn't make much sense. So I'm not quite sure.
We do already have a precedent of him creating robots of himself, so who knows, really?
Right, yeah.
We do also see in previous issues him forcing some of his goons to dress up as Hobgoblin.
Right.
Because he does have
like
many
as a
costumes.
Right. So
Right.
so we do know that he has a bunch of or I don't know a bunch, but he has people working for him that he has had dress up as Hobgoblin to divert the trail so that Spider-Man doesn't catch him.
And I guess, I mean, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag about later, but is it Roger Stern, when he comes back, I was just reading up a little bit on this, but in order to, because the team, after he left, made the Hobgoblin someone else that he didn't intend on revealing to be the Hobgoblin, when he came back and retconned it, he introduced a twin brother.
You know what? I knew about the twin brother, but I thought the twin brother was introduced back in these days. But I guess, okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, because that could explain something like this. I also have to give a quick note that I'm glad you mentioned that, Jolie, because when Dan Slott was writing Spider-Man, George and I and Kevin reviewed a Spider-Man story where Roderick Kingsley returned. And then in the same issue, someone came in and stabbed him through the chest and killed him. And I trolled Dan Slott for killing off such a long-standing character with no regard for continuity and blah blah blah. And Dan Slott was like, "Just wait." A year goes by, we find out the person killed Roderick Kingsley's twin.
Yep.
And Dan Slott actually came back to our YouTube page and put "Mwah" on our YouTube channel. Isn't that awesome?
That is fantastic.
Yes, he was waiting. Anyway, so let me ask you this, Phil. As a mystery, I mean, you didn't get much here, but do you think... Oh, and by the way, I got to also point out that the person who Ron Frenz and... Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz revealed as the Hobgoblin ended up being Ned Leeds, who's also... He's in this story too, I think, with J. Jonah Jameson, right? Isn't he? Ned Leeds? I think he's the one that comes in with J. Jonah Jameson. No, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. I thought he was in here, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay.
That's in Marvel Team Up.
Okay. So
Ned Leeds,
that's Ned Leeds. Ned Leeds is by the way, that story was written by Tom DeFalco. So that's the one that Tom DeFalco revealed as Hobgoblin. Phil, I know you didn't get much here, but what did you think about the mystery, at least, or of the identity of the Hobgoblin?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really well done. I just love the pacing of it. And like I was mentioning before, it really reminds me of the way old pulp used to be done, So, a lot of the same sort of tropes you can find in here. It's really, really cool the way that they put it all together.
Excellent. Gia, Julie, how do you feel? I know it seems like every week you say this is the first good Spider-Man story I've ever read. So, what did you think about this one?
This is the second best Spider-Man story I've ever read.
Okay.
No,
it's
got a lot of TV police procedural plot kind of, but when they follow the bad guys, that's the kind of plot.
Right.
It kind of it works. It's not terrible. Do you know what? It really is not terrible at all. It's readable. It's super readable, and this is exactly the kind of Spider-Man story I want to read. It reads like an actual book that somebody edited. Someone took the time to make sure it was good. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I agree. Joshua Mervell, what do you think?
No, I think that we're finally getting into the time of Spider-Man where there's a real story happening. I mean, in previous issues, things were happening, but they didn't always feel like they meant anything at the end of the day. Where this really feels like there are actual things happening to the characters. The bad guys don't kind of just show up for an issue, twirl their mustache, and say their evil plan and leave. There's some depth, both with Hobgoblin and the Kingpin. I think that the Kingpin is a very underrated Spider-Man villain, and he's not really brought up a lot. I think that he's written so cleverly with how evil and conniving he is, and how he does everything no matter what it is, to better himself. So in this situation, he needs Spider-Man alive. Even though that they're enemies, he needs Spider-Man to track down the Hobgoblin. That way he doesn't have to worry about dealing with the Hobgoblin. He doesn't really have time for this. He doesn't want to get dragged in, so Spider-Man, listen, you take care of this dude. Like I just every little detail seems planned and thought out, and there's a reason for everything in this issue to happen. And I love that.
I would totally agree with Josh on that one. Yeah, big time. I feel like, especially with Kingpin, you know, it's just a couple of panels, right? Like, really, it's just a few panels, and somehow you know exactly how calculating he is. You know exactly what his plan is. You know, it's really great the way that they did it, and in such a small amount of space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great point. And the other cool thing about, since it's a comic book, they're able to give him the physically impossible enormous size, right? Like, you know, even the actor who plays him in the TV show Daredevil is gigantic, but he's nowhere near this big. Like, you just look at this panel and you can see how powerful he is, right?
Yeah.
He's got his two little guys next to him that are half as big as him, and he's just like as big as a house, you know. And like you said, you know, you only see him in a few panels, but it's so clear how powerful he is. Like, when he puts his hand to look at the storytelling by John Romita Jr. on original page 18. The goon is reaching into his jacket to get his gun, and Kingpin is just sipping away on his cocktail with his gigantic mitten out, stopping him, right? And it's like, you don't even need the dialogue. This could be a silent comic, and you know exactly what was going on,
For
right?
sure. I mean, Kingpin is, I think, the scariest character in this issue, and this is an issue where the Hobgoblin shows up and brings everybody together in this room. He like shows up out of nowhere. He ends up being a robot. Then he flies in on a glider and starts throwing bombs everywhere. And Kingpin is still the more intimidating character.
Unfazed.
So, yeah, I really, really love the story in this issue. And can we talk about the art real quick? Because it's amazing. It's
I know.
I don't know if it's Dan Green inking with John Romita Jr. because John Romita Jr. we see his art every week, but there's something about this issue. It's just so fantastic.
You know what's funny? I don't usually like Dan Green, and I actually, when John Romita Jr. and Dan Green were doing X-Men, everybody hated John Romita, including Chris Claremont.
Really?
No, and I've been trying to like change the world, you know, one post at a time by telling everybody it's actually Dan Green's fault because he made Romita's art so sketchy. But looking at this issue, you're right. I'm not sure if it's the inks or if it's just that. Or I don't know if it's like the sketchiness or if it's just the fact that Romita himself was just, you know, trying extra hard with his pencils. But yeah, the art is really good in this issue. And also, I want to point out the close-up of Hobgoblin's face on original page 15. The close-up of Hobgoblin's face. That is amazing, you know? Like, the texture in that picture is just perfect. I mean, this is classic. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I was gonna say, even the anatomy and the figure drawing in like the pool party scene, like you can really feel like the depth and the weight of the characters. That first splash page is fantastic. It's fantastic. I really, really loved the art in this issue. Might be my favorite that we've read so far.
And the thing is like some people criticize John Romita Jr.'s anatomy, but the thing is the key thing with him is it's not like the individual muscles are accurate to an anatomy professor, but his figures, I think it was Josh or Phil said, they look like they exist in real space. Like there's so much depth, there's so much weight, you know. And like for example, when there's a big close up. Where is it? Okay, it's original page 16 when J. Jonah Jameson is being held back by those guys, and you see Hobgoblin in the foreground. Just the way his hands are hanging there, they look like three-dimensional hands. They have like the gloves wrapped around a real hand, and the inking on his legs, right? Like those look like thick thighs there, and even though, like I said, okay, maybe it's not 100% accurate, at least it looks like it's three-dimensional.
Right.
And that's important, right?
Yeah, so, I don't think that it has to be accurate to be believable. Like I don't need every single drawing to be like a realistic rendering of a real human, and I don't really want that in comics either, especially something like Spider-Man. Like it's the story itself is cartoony and fun. I prefer when the art matches that.
Yeah, good point.
It is just a testament to good art. Like, this person, like, on the same page where he's knocking the head off of Robot Hobgoblin, there are never going to be that many creases in a suit, but when you add that many lines in the varying thicknesses as a professional artist who is good at what they do, it creates tension in the fabric.
Right.
That adds more believability in the actions that are happening. And that's what's so successful about this, is that they're not just an artist. And that's do you know what? And that's probably why I hate 98% of the art that's out there today in comics, is that there are artists who are, you know, are capable of rendering, but they're not capable of using the art to its fullest potential. And this is an example of a fullest potential scenario.
Yeah, I agree. So I would definitely recommend this issue. Phil, would you recommend this issue?
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, G.I. Jolie.
I would leave issues of this on a bus or in the wild. Like, give me just quarter copies or reprints, and I'll just leave it, like, in the park, in a bathhouse, you know, wherever people are gonna be.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Josh, what about you?
Yeah, for sure. I would 100% recommend this. Before we move on to Marvel Team Up, I do want to just make a comment about this one moment where Peter is talking to MJ, and somebody in like the crowd of people says, "I don't get it. What does she see in him?"
Right.
Which is, I think, hilarious, because, like, I know Peter Parker's kind of a dork, but, like,
right,
he's walking around in cut-off jean shorts and a crop top, and he's, like, completely jacked. Like, he's got these huge arms, a six-pack, and they're like, I just do not know what she sees in him. I thought that was hilarious.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because, like, in the early 60s, Steve Ditko drew Peter as a skinny nerd, but then John Romita Sr. Drew him as, like, a more buff, handsome leading man. And, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. Like, wait a minute, is he supposed to be unattractive? I can't tell. Mm-hmm. And like you said, like, as Spider-Man, he has perfect muscles. So, yeah, I can kind of see why Mary Jane would like him, right?
Well, I mean, look at everyone else, though. These guys walking around in Speedos. The guys making comments. They have, like, slick gelled hair that's longer, very 80s, wearing chains, obviously smoking sexy-ass cigarettes. Like, who... Oh, my God. Like, why would Mary Jane want this loser? Do you know what I did? I Googled Alan Alda 1984. He was such a dish. Who wouldn't want that? He's a little, he's a little bit dorky looking.
Alan Alda was never a dish, but anyway,
I
don't think so.
Well, they say wimpy Alan Alda, but it's like he's cute. He's not as threatening as these obviously like super masculine heroes, but whatever. You like what you like, and maybe Mary Jane likes a little. Maybe she just likes every flavor. Who knows?
Could be.
I love that.
All right.
Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to. I thought it would be a disservice to the podcast if we didn't talk about Peter Parker in a crop top. But
you're right.
I'm glad we mentioned it.
I cut all my t-shirts into crop tops after these panels.
Okay, and on that note, I know you were trying to delay the inevitable, Josh, but now it's time to talk about Marvel Team Up.
Right. Okay. So we have Marvel Team Up number 138. In this issue, Spider-Man is teaming up with the Sandman. Friend or foe? We're going to find out in this issue. So we start off. We start off with Spider-Man kind of in a duel with Sandman, and he uses the vacuum to suck him up. By the end of the fight, it turns out to all just be a nightmare by the Sandman, and we kind of do some catching up with him. He's gotten he's gotten away from his life of crime with the help of the Thing, his former enemy. He's kind of gone to like a normal life. He's renting out a room in this family's house. I think their name's the Casadas.
Yeah.
And he's working at a like a factory or like a warehouse or something. So he's kind of like trying to turn his life around. We catch up with Spider-Man. He's swinging around. He's still trying to deal with the fact that he doesn't have his spider senses. And then after that, we go and we find out that the Arranger was hired by the Kingpin to put together a new Enforces team. And they're like running like a crime syndicate type thing. Crime is like at an all-time high now. So Joe Robinson has to Joe Robinson asks Ned Leeds and Peter Parker to go kind of do some investigating, take some pictures, and then come back so they can write a story. So Peter Parker's around town. He finds these goons, and as Spider-Man, he starts fighting them. Without his spider senses, though, he gets overtaken by them and gets taken over. That's when Sandman notices what's going on after he finds out that Casada's new candy shop was broken into, the man that he is renting from. So he goes to this warehouse and helps Spider-Man. Spider-Man and Sandman team up to take these guys down. And then once they're all done, Spider-Man's kind of like, what's going on here? Like, you're a bad guy. Can I really trust you? And they're kind of like talking it out. Spider-Man realizes that he can't just let him go, even though he believes him. He believes Sandman is telling the truth about turning his life around. He said kind of like, sorry, got to do it. And then we find out that there's a man with a grenade hiding around the corner. He throws the grenade and Sandman jumps in front of it and sacrifices himself to save Spider-Man. And Spider-Man kind of swings away, not knowing if Sandman is alive or not. And Sandman kind of reforms, and that's where we leave this issue off. I will say it's not bad. It's not awful.
Right. Is that a question?
Like, yeah, like this was another not so terrible Marvel team up. I don't know if maybe like I just have a higher tolerance for it now or what, but
you have a gigantic Marvel team up callus.
Well, just to be clear, it's written by Tom DeFalco, who is about to take over Amazing Spider-Man from Roger Stern in 3 issues. So get used to it. Yeah. So yeah, definitely a decent writer. I'll just say quickly. I know for a fact that this is kind of a retread of a classic Amazing Spider-Man story. Like, there's a lot of panels here that I'm like, oh, well, that's copied from Steve Ditko. That's copied from Steve Ditko.
Gotcha.
And unfortunately, Tom DeFalco has a bad reputation for that. Of like, when he took over Thor, he just regurgitated all Jack Kirby stuff. When he took over FF, he kind of regurgitated a lot of Stan Lee, Jack Kirby stuff. So I think he's doing that here. But I did enjoy it, though. But G.I. Julie, what was your impression of this issue?
Yeah, I too am kind of surprised that it was okay. It wasn't good by any means. It was still really sloppily put together. I will say, however, that I am newly interested in all of this fun lingo, like the word. I love how they've just repurposed an administrative assistant to being the arranger. So now in my future, if I ever become anyone's assistant, I'm just going to refer to myself as the arranger and reference this book. But like the way that they put the 2 characters together, which is always my problem with these Marvel team-ups, was still... It wasn't as strained as it usually is, but it was still kind of strained. I like, though, the whole Sandman plotline. I was pleasantly
Right.
surprised by this. I've only experienced the Sandman in the Spider-Man movies. I will admit that.
Okay.
So, just having read this book and that it's kind of like a turnaround redemption story, I liked it. I liked that he moved in with a family and that he's like working at a factory, but trouble followed him, which is unfortunate.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. Phil, what'd you think?
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. I think that I had a lot of the same thoughts that Jolie had on this. It's funny. Well, first of all, yeah, I have like no experience with Sandman either, except for the movie. And I have to point out that if you look at the cover, that is Thomas Hayden Church, if I've ever seen him. Like 100%,
I know.
man. Like, look at it. It's like I have this idea in my head of this Hollywood exec like looking through old Sandman comics, and he just never bothered to open any. He just looked at this cover and he was like, "That's Thomas Hayden Church. Let's get him."
Yep, 100%.
He's not doing
I
anything.
agree.
He's not on Wings anymore. So yeah. So yeah, and I like to start with the art, I guess. So I really love the artwork.
Sure.
But it's completely different, obviously, to the other issue that we looked at. In my opinion, not nearly as good. But it's super engaging. Like, look at the composition in these frames. It's crazy. Like, there's so much movement in every single one of these. It's just, I don't know. I really like the way that they put it together. Even though, like, sometimes his leg is about 4 times the length of his body. But never mind that. It's more like, what's the feel of it, right? So I really like that part of it. And there was a number of things that struck me about this. Like, first of all, it seemed like this issue and the issue that we were talking about before, there's this like kind of strange kind of sensitivity to the characters that I wasn't really expecting. In the other issue, there's Peter Parker kind of, helping out his friend and, telling his friend it's okay, you can lean on me, you're having problems, all this kind of stuff, right? And then obviously there's a lot of sort of sensitive moments with Sandman throughout this comic, which I found like really sort of, I wouldn't say heart-wrenching, that's probably going overboard, but definitely it was more meaning. You could see the writer was trying to add a little bit more depth to the comic itself, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's partly why I've always, Spider-Man's always been one of my favorite superheroes, and it's because, and that's why it really irks me when people are like, "Oh, get rid of Peter Parker, replace him with Miles Morales." It's like, no, because Peter Parker's Peter Parker, right? Like, there's no one like Peter Parker, and I've even heard people say that they grew up and they basically learned their morals from Peter Parker, and I partly feel the same way because sometimes, Peter Parker will get a bonus at work. And he'll make all this extra money, and then Aunt May will need rent money, so he'll just hand it over to her, and it's just like, this guy really is a great person. And I mean, I love Batman, but if you're going to get your morals from someone, it's probably going to be Peter Parker before it's Bruce Wayne, right? But
unless you're like looking for relationship advice, in which case you should just put the book down.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not counting the way Peter Parker treated Deborah Whitman for 2 years, not counting that. But anyway, but yeah, I actually really like the art too. Like, the way I see it is, the Amazing Spider-Man issue we read is a really good issue of Spidey. This is what I call the baseline. Like, this is what I hope every Spider-Man story to be. And this is, I don't want to, like, it's not great, but it's not bad, and I enjoyed reading it, and like, the art wasn't as good as John Romita, but the art was still good. I like the subplot with Sandman, with the family and all that, and you read the whole story, you get a complete beginning, middle, and end. So I think the only strike against it is that I know that they were kind of just retreating an old story from the 60s, but other than that, I thought it was really good. Anyone else have anything else to say about this? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Oh, no, it's okay. So I was just wondering, like, between the two writers and between the two issues, was there a change in the dynamic, within the company? Like, were they trying to aim? It seems like they're trying to aim for a younger audience. Like, even though some of these ideas seem to it touches upon sort of larger themes and ideas, like incarceration, second chances, and fear and doubt that come with that, etc. Right? But at the same time, the writing is a lot more, YA or young adult, right? Like it seems like it's more like aimed at somebody who's 13 or 14 rather than 19.
That's an interesting observation. Now, these comics all came out the same month.
Oh wow! Okay.
So so the way we do it is every week we review 1 month's worth of Spider-Man comics. That's why it's always Amazing, Spectacular, and Marvel Team Up, because those all came out in 1 month, right?
Oh, all right.
So
But-
every month in 1984, there was one Amazing Spider-Man, one Spectacular, and then one Marvel Team Up that came out every month.
Yeah.
So
Wow, that's
But-
really interesting. Did you guys notice
but-
a difference in the writing?
yes.
Oh.
Well,
Always,
I think like Tom DeFalco's reputation is that he writes more for younger people. Like I think he started out at Archie, so he
Right.
was an Archie writer or editor for a couple years. Then he did Supergirl. Then he came to Spider-Man. But I mean, from what I gather, his reputation in the industry is always that he's sort of written more childish comics. But sometimes he is popular and well liked.
I think too at around this time, things didn't feel as like planned out, or like it didn't have as much of a structure or a plan, because not necessarily as much now, but when we first started reading comics for this podcast, like in the early 80s, the comics were extremely inconsistent, both in
Right.
tone and what was actually happening to the characters. Like in one issue, we would read Peter Parker would be dating one character, and then in the next, he's on a date with somebody completely different. Or even like the characterization of somebody, like Deb Whitman, again, for example, in one issue, she was a sweetheart and kind of Peter Parker's love interest, and then in another one, she's just like has like a completely different personality. Like it didn't feel like there was as much consistency, or like I guess like rules for what the characters could and couldn't do, or even rules about like events and what was happening. So the tone really shifts from comic to comic, and kind of as like a general rule for Marvel Team Up, it always feels like a commercial for a different comic. It's never really Spider-Man's comic.
Right.
That's what Marvel Team Up was kind of used for, at least in my opinion at the time. I don't see it as much in this one because it's a Sandman comic, and Sandman is already a Spider-Man character. But
Right.
we usually pick Spider-Man up out of his comic and we drop him into somebody else's every month, so that way Spider-Man fans kind of get an insight to what's happening in other comics. So it kind of forces them to go read like the Defenders comics or Doctor Strange. It's kind of like a window into a whole nother comic itself.
The other thing I'll say is that the other thing to remember is that at this time, the only characters that existed in multiple titles per month would have been Spider-Man, Superman, and Batman, and that's it, as far as I know.
Oh wow.
So Superman was juggling at one point 5 titles, then it was 3. Batman had 3, and Spider-Man had 3. By the time you got to the 90s, Spider-Man had 11. X-Men had at least 3 or 4 plus spin-offs. Batman had 4 or 5. So it got crazy. But yeah, at this time, it was probably harder than average to keep things consistent because like he was spread across 3 titles. But anyway. But yeah, getting back to your point, I definitely have always thought of Tom DeFalco. I mean, the least polite way to say it is trashy. I've always thought his comics were, they took themselves less seriously. Like it's like, at least with Roger Stern, it seems like he's trying to write a good, serious story. Whereas with Tom DeFalco, even if it is good, he'll undercut it with something stupid thrown in just because you can kind of see him thinking, it doesn't matter. It's just a comic book. I'll throw some aliens in there. I'll throw some this, that, and the other. And he never really cared. He was just, but he does write fun stories, and he's usually pretty good at dialogue. So he's fun, But anyway, so yeah, I will give this comic a mild recommendation. It's not great, but again, like I said, it's like baseline Spider-Man for me. It's what I expect out of a Spidey comic. So, Jolie, what do you think?
Because it's an okay team up. And for anyone who's interested or whose interests were piqued by Thomas Hayden Church's performance, I would recommend this one. Yeah, if someone was like, ooh, I really like that portrayal, I would be like, oh, did you know Marvel Team Up? And then I would be like, here you go.
Okay.
So, yes.
Josh, what do you think?
As a Marvel team up, this is maybe the highest recommendation I could possibly give.
It's getting better and better for Marvel Team Up. All right.
As far as Marvel Team Up goes, but I think as just like a comic, it's pretty good. Yeah, I would definitely recommend this issue.
All right, Phil, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. It's just a slight recommendation. There's a lot of cheesiness in this. But yeah, I mean, the story works, and they touch upon a few things that are interesting. Like I said, I like that they kind of get into the softer side of these characters. That's an interesting take.
Right.
Yeah. And again, okay, real quick before we move on, I know that we're already going a little bit longer than usual, but on original page 5, there is a panel that is the worst thing I've ever seen. I think in a comic. On original page 5, there's a panel that is put in sideways. Yep. And I hate it so much. I was reading this and a chill went down my spine. It's awful. It's so bad. It looks like the art itself should be normal. Like Spider-Man is clinging to the side of a building and it's like a bird's eye view of the street. Nothing to me says that it's flipped sideways, so I don't know why the dialogue is flipped sideways.
Yeah, that's annoying.
It's awful.
Yeah,
I hate it.
It's like when they make issues of comics that are landscape instead of portrait. I just want to throw it in the garbage.
Well, I don't mind that as long as it's consistent.
Right.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't like that. But at least, again, like Mike was saying, it's consistent. Like, that's what the book is. This was just so jarring and awful to see. It's like one of the, like, those, like, unsatisfying pictures you see? Where it's like, something is just off slightly. That's what this was. Like, it's just like, it's the opposite of satisfaction. It's, oh, God. It was not nice to look at.
It almost looks like
blinding
it was drawn.
Anger.
It almost looks like it was drawn and created right side up, and then the editor cut it and pasted it. It was like, oh crap, I gotta fix this. Yeah. It was just really lazy to leave the dialogue sideways. But anyway, okay, we are gonna jump now to Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, number 87, and just to bring you up to speed, Phil. Black Cat has been Spidey's on again, off again girlfriend for a couple years, in between also dating 5 other girls and sleeping with Kazar's girlfriend. But anyway, but Black Cat is in love with Spider-Man. Black Cat does not know who Peter Parker is, doesn't know what he looks like. And that's about to change with this issue. So, Josh, you can take it from here. Oh, no, G.I. Jolie, you can take it from here.
Okay. Well, just in case anyone is interested, Bill Mantlo did the story, and Al Milgrom did the art. Jim Mooney did the inks. And if we're going, somebody named Albers and another person named Shield did the letters and the colors, respectively. Okay. So, again, we've left off the last issue that we read. Spider-Man has decided that he's going to commit to this whole relationship with Felicia / Black Cat. And he's like, okay, fine. I'm going to take you home. And they swing off into the sunset and with the idea, leaving the reader with the idea that he's going to take her to his apartment. And like, admittedly to me, I was excited because it's like, oh my God, he's going to treat someone well for once in his life. So we start off still sunset and he's like, I'm going to show you my place. And they swing over to, they swing around for a while because she seems to get like a really big thrill out of that, which is okay. Some people like heights. I don't, but you do you. And they finally settle on a rooftop where you can see into the skylight. And she's kind of like confused, but doesn't really allude to her disappointment until you get the like you kind of have a bird's eye view and you look in, and she realizes that it's like the view of the skylight's in his bathroom. And she's like, again, the reader senses her disappointment, but she doesn't let on. She's like, okay, whatever. Maybe it's bigger on the inside, like a TARDIS. Who knows? So she says nothing. And Spider-Man is like, okay, jump on down. So they're like inside of his apartment, inside his bathroom. And her disappointment is never allayed. It's just a tiny ass apartment. And she's shocked. She's like, Is this a joke? And he's like, well, I took you to where I work first. And he did tell her he's a photojournalist at the Daily Bugle. And he's like, I'm not rich. Like, this is what being a photojournalist can afford me in New York City. New York City? Jersey? New York City? Yeah. He lives in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, is it Queens?
I think Queens.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Queens, before gentrification. So it wasn't expensive, but it was still pricey because it's in the city. So she's destroyed? Is that the correct word?
Yeah.
Like, she just can't believe it. So she's like, no. He unmasks himself and reveals that he's Peter Parker. And she is disgusted. In a way that I've never seen a woman react before.
She's like, your mask, please put your mask back on.
Yeah, it's almost as if he's deformed.
Yeah.
Well, this is exactly how girls react when they see me without my mask on, though, so I can totally relate. But anyway.
Well, I mean, if we're drawing comparisons. So, but here's the thing. He puts it back on, and he's like, oh, I get it. I see. You love Spider-Man. And she's like, I do. He's my mystery. Like, he's my man. I love the adventure. Why can't we just away into the night? You as Spider-Man and me as Black Cat Felicia. And he's like, okay. And they jump. Yeah, he's like, oh, I guess this is what she wants. But all the while, so they leave his apartment as suggested. And they continue to fly to her fancy, and while they're kind of web setting around Queens, he's thinking in his head, like he's just having second thoughts, but he's also trying to like make excuses for her, like this whatever, this is okay, she just wants Spidey. He's like, this whole time, and then you get one of those like really classic frames where you see his thoughts as like kind of ghosty figures, and it's all the women that Peter Parker has dated that he can't reveal he's Spider-Man to. But he's like, you know what? That's not an issue with her. She knows I'm Spider-Man, except for the fact that she doesn't like that he's Peter Parker and poor. But he's like, we can continue to forget about that. Just as he's about to maybe reconcile those thoughts, he hears the sound of a gunshot, or gunshots and sirens, and it kind of like rips him out of this fantasy. And he's like, oh, hold that thought, I gotta go do some rescuing. And she's like, but I'm Black Cat, I'm going with you. And anyway, so they swing to the rescue, and they do their hero thing, like kick a little ass, and that's it. They continue to swing around with him as Spider-Man and her as Black Cat, and they continue to like pretend as if he never revealed himself as Peter Parker, and that she was just minutes ago repulsed by this quote man that she's in love with.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of how they end the story. tonight there is no Peter Parker. Tonight there's only Spider-Man. Tonight. And for how many nights to come? Like, that's how they end the story. Like some melodramatic soap opera. And part of me is empathizing with Spider-Man. I used to rail against him because of his womanizing ways, but now he is being used and abused by this hoe bag, and I just want to lay her out, because that is not what you do to the man that you love. Anyway, thoughts, boys?
Josh, you can go ahead. What do you think?
I don't know. It's hard to feel bad for Spider-Man because I've been reading this story for so long, and Spider-Man has just been such an asshole to Felicia that I'm kind of like, yeah, that's what you freaking deserve. Like, I don't feel bad for either of them. Like, this story sucks. I really, really hated it. Like, nothing happens. Like, things happen, but they don't mean anything at the end of the day. Like, this whole relationship and this whole story arc has just been, like, can be summarized in this comic. Something is revealed, but at the end, it doesn't really matter, and they kind of go back to normal and pretend like nothing's happening and don't know if they should be together or not. Then the next issue, there's this weird revelation. Oh, look, this is happening, and then by the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. We'll go back to kind of just having a will they won't they relationship, and I'm just done with it. I don't care. Like, that's how I feel by the end of reading this. It's just like, yeah, who cares? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't care if they're together at the end of the day. And I think that really says something about this relationship and this story. Is it doesn't matter, and which sucks because it should. Like, I should really care about them being together. I should really want them to be superheroes and have this relationship with each other. But there's nothing happening in the story or even with the characters that makes me want to root for them to stay together.
Yeah.
So each week I'm just kind of like, more stuff is piled onto this random story that's happening, and nothing really actually matters. Like, just things are happening. Again, I don't care. Like, these characters are not making me want them to be together. So,
Phil, what do you think?
I think, first of all, I would echo a lot of your thoughts too, but it's funny how much changes when you don't have the context of the prior issues and you're looking at it with modern eyes. Like, it's just completely different take, Like, I had no idea that Peter Parker was this sort of playboy or womanizer, right? So, I'm coming into this comic with literally just what's in front of me. So I feel like Peter is, after years of being with this girl, he finally wants to show her who he is, and this is the way that she treats him, So
right,
it just felt very different to me. Where hearing the history of it from you guys, it's obviously I should have been feeling a different way, but and two, I don't know. Again, I'm just reading into it way too much, like with sort of a modern perspective, but it feels like. Well, I mean, if you just take it at face value of what's going on in the words in the paneling, that it seems like, to me, the writer was trying to say something about identity, right? Like, her repulsion of his regular self versus his superhero self probably says more about her than it does about him, but then also, makes him think about who he wants to become and why he's become the person that he's become. And then at the same time, like, he kind of wants to keep her in a little box, even at one point she's like, what did she say? He doesn't want her to get into the action, even though she's a freaking superhero. And he's like, no, you stay here. And then she says something like, something about her not, or him not letting her stay. Or, you know what I mean? Like, she says, he didn't let her do anything, right? So it's kind of like she's trying to break out of this box that she's in, and he's trying to break out of the box that he's in, and neither of them can do it. Obviously, I'm reading way into it.
Well, no, I think you're pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. If you quickly, if you take away all the other girls that Peter's slept with, written by other women, and just assume that he's had this good relationship with Black Cat, your reading makes sense, I think. But anyway, Josh, you were going to say?
I think, too, the thing is, those are really great ideas and strong, thoughts. Especially with, especially with Peter, wanting to kind of be in, a superhero relationship, but also scared that she's going to get hurt. And that's cool, and, I think a strong story point, but it has been done so many times in this story arc. I don't know how many times she's been I just want to be a superhero with you. And Peter has to be I don't know. I don't want you to get hurt. And then at the end of the issue, he's you know what? You're right. We'll be superheroes together. And then the next issue, it's the same thing again. No, you don't join the fight. I don't want you getting hurt. And then he accepts it by the end. And it's just extremely repetitive, and they're going nowhere. I think that if this issue was standalone by itself, I think it might be stronger and might feel like a good story. But I think because I'm coming from it as a person who is reading this story and has context from what's happened before, I am just done with it. Right? Yeah. And I completely see where you're coming from too, though, because there are those strong themes, and I think that that's really interesting for a superhero to go through. And it feels fresh and new, but unfortunately, because they've done it so many times, for somebody who's been reading, it's not new at all, and it's kind of just exhausting at this point.
It's psychologically exhausting.
Yeah.
Because not only does she think his life as Peter Parker is disgusting, but in one panel on original page 14, she's I understand, Spider, and I'll make you proud of me. It's wait. She's still seeking his approval to be his partner, yet he has just verbalized and that he's committing to her, and the one true way he can show his commitment is by unmasking himself and revealing to her his secret identity, and he does it, and she is confusingly repulsed by him and his lifestyle, and then she it's just this it's this weird, it's a weird yo-yo, because it's somebody who is that in love with somebody should have been oh my god, this is crazy. Your apartment is small, let's just move in with me. That should have been the end of that discussion. But clearly
For sure.
There's something deeply strange about her, because she continues, despite knowing and being just turned off by his situation, his real life situation, she's still seeking approval from him.
Right.
A person who has committed himself to her.
Right.
And paid all of her hospital bills. Or whatever. But it's so confusing. What? You're right. I don't really want justice for Spider-Man here.
Yeah.
I still want to free Deb, but I don't know that we should continue on anymore with these two, because it's just, I feel like this is, do they end up rewriting her as a villain after this?
Not really, no, but
Okay.
I won't say what happens, but she is back, definitely.
I think for me, what it feels like is not them. It's not Black Cat bouncing back and forth. It's the writers not knowing where they want to take this story.
Right.
Because
Okay.
it's so extremely repetitive, and it contradicts itself so much. I think it was the last issue, or even the one before that. They go on a date, and Felicia says, "Reveal your secret identity. I don't care who you are." it doesn't matter to me. I just don't want that secret to be out. Like, I just want us to be together. And then in this issue, it's like the opposite. She's like repulsed by the fact that he's just a normal dude. It's just, I don't think that they have exactly what they want or where they want to go with this planned out. And it feels like they're kind of just running on the spot, trying to like keep this will they, won't they dynamic going. Right, and fill the pages.
Well, one thing I want to point out that I really like, though, if you go to page 4, when he first brings her to the rooftop, I just love this part where he's like, she's like, "This is where you live? Rent's cheap. Something wrong? Wrong? Oh no, it's just that I was expecting, well, something more along the lines of a spider cave or fortress of spider tube."
Right.
It's actually kind of funny. Not a bathroom, but like this is to me what defines not just Spider-Man, but all the Marvel heroes, or what makes them different from DC heroes. Like, Phil, did that stand out to you at all? Did you ever think about that? The fact that DC's heroes are kind of more like gods, the Fortress of Solitude, there's the Batcave, there's Commissioner Gordon, and then Spider-Man is just this dude that rents an apartment because that's all he can afford. And did that stand out to you at all?
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, completely. It's really interesting that it's pointed out. That, I mean, it's funny the way that it's pointed out in here, for sure.
Yeah, I just think that was so cool. G.I. Julie, did you notice that at all? Or, I mean, is that something you ever thought about? Or
it's something that I'm already aware of because it's kind of like what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. Whenever they talk about, they kind of like will do an Uncle Ben, but in the same breath also mention that he's a penniless photographer. Right, from New York. And like everybody is struggling in New York. I mean, the girls in Girls all live together in one tiny apartment in New York. So like everybody knows that about New York, is that everyone goes there to like live or make it, but no one can afford to live there. So I think it definitely is something that makes Marvel heroes relatable. It makes them more human, but also I always hated the comparison to DC characters. Yes, they may be godlike and they may be sort of untouchable or have different origins, but that's what makes all of these superheroes special.
Oh, I'm definitely not saying Marvel's better because
no. But
who
other
am I,
people,
Mike Dell? I mean, no.
Other people do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, like, while I like that it makes them more relatable, it gives you a lot of characters to kind of pick. Like, who do I like? You don't necessarily have to be defined by somebody you can relate to. It could just be a matter of like preference. I like gods, but I also like a kid from Brooklyn. Like, it's just cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that the stories are pretty similar between like DC and Marvel heroes. I think, again, the big difference is I can see myself in Spider-Man. Right, like I can see myself as Spider-Man, or name any other Marvel hero. I can probably relate to them on some level, but I think that the main DC heroes, it is like that, like heroic god-like character. And while I do really enjoy them, I don't always see myself as them, and I think that's the big difference, and where people kind of mix up better versus relatable.
Good point.
Like, I don't always want to read a character that's me. Sometimes I want to escape and read those other characters that are more fantastical and out there. So
That's right. One other thing I want to touch on before we wrap up, starting with you, Phil, the art is obviously different. This is Al Milgrom and Jim Mooney, and without saying anything, I just want to know what your impression of it is, the art in this issue.
This was my least favorite art out of the three, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the same sort of I don't know how to describe it really well, but like sort of compositional elements as the second one, the Sandman one.
Yeah. Right.
There's a lot of motion, a lot of those sort of superhero poses, right? Throughout the issue, but I don't know. There's something about it that just struck me as kind of regular compared to the other two.
Yeah. Well, I'll just tell you that Al Milgrom is kind of notoriously disliked as an artist.
Oh, okay.
He's not popular, and now with the internet, everything is amplified by 11, and everyone hates him. I don't hate his art. He's not great, but he has his moments, and when he's teamed up with a good inker, he's good. This inker is Jim Mooney, and he's actually one of my favorites. And I know that the pencils are not, and the composition isn't great, but I do think Jim Mooney is just a master of inking faces, especially women, because he spent a huge chunk of his career doing Supergirl, and he was perfect for that. But if you just look at the way he does Black Cat's face, it's very subtle. Like I can pencil okay, I cannot ink to save my life, and what he does with the Black Cat's face is just, to me, it's magical. But
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, page 14, page 13, she's just like Barbie beautiful.
Yep. Yep.
And like he completely saves the art.
Right. Yeah, it's very subtle, but he knows how to do it.
Yeah, there's like there's a panel where her Black Cat and Spider-Man are swinging in, the last panel on page 15, where you see Black Cat swinging in on Spidey's web, and he's running along the side of a building. Like that is cute, so cute, and there's something about the poses that was only, you just look at it and the inker saved that.
Yeah. You're right. It's a good idea, but he probably really smoothed it out with his inks. But yeah, So yeah, definitely the weakest art, but still there is something good about it. I definitely think. But okay, so now as far as recommendations, I'm still gonna recommend this issue because again, it's classic. It's still classic Spidey to me. It's kind of a clunker of an issue, but I still have nostalgic feelings for this era, so I'm gonna recommend it. Phil, what about you?
Yeah, I'll say definitely cheesy, but I would still recommend it, particularly with as a single issue without anything prior to it. I could see how you guys would be pissed off about it. Just like, oh, this again, Jesus. So, and then though, of course, the way that it's handled too, after all of that, will they, won't they? I could see how it'd be irritating. But as a one-off, I felt a little bit differently about it, but it was still cheesy. I would still give it a go, though.
Awesome. G.I. Jolie, what about you?
Oh, yeah. If you are interested in... if someone asked me what they should read when it comes to, like, Black Cat and Spider-Man, I would say this is probably one of the most organized adventures that they go on together.
Okay.
That kind of gives you a little more insight on their relationship. I would say it gives you a lot of insight because Felicia's actually conscious for this issue. Instead of laid up for the 50th issue in a hospital bed. So maybe, I don't know, maybe somewhere along the line they knock her down again, but who knows? This sure. It's not the worst one so far.
All right, with that ringing endorsement, Joshua Mervell, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel pretty much the same as Jolie. I think that being somebody who's been reading this story, like, I'm completely fed up with it, but I think that you could read this issue and get the entire relationship with Black Cat and Spider-Man. You know exactly from beginning of this arc to the end of this arc, or at least to this point of the arc, what exactly happened. So if you kind of want to get a gist of what's going on with this relationship, read this issue and then be done with it, because I can't. It definitely nothing before this is relevant or has any like weight to it. I'm not sure what's to come, but I feel like you could read this issue and get that entire story arc and kind of their relationship. I mean, even by the end of this, I feel like even if I hadn't read anything prior, I see the writing on the wall. I know that they're never going to actually be together forever.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, even if you don't read any afterwards, or no matter what happens, it's kind of like, yeah, they're not going to end up together.
No.
Interesting.
So, I would recommend it with that caveat. Like, yeah, if you want to know what's happening in the story, read this issue.
Better or worse than Marvel Team Up this week?
Worse, in my opinion.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's hope it gets
Yeah,
better.
I like
All right.
Marvel Team Up this week.
All right.
Yeah.
And just so you know, Bill Mantlo I believe he's leaving Spectacular soon, so we're gonna have a new writer. Unfortunately, the writer's Al Milgram, but we'll see. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. But anyway, we want to give a big special thanks to Phil for joining us this week.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Thank
thanks
you,
for having
Phil.
me, guys. This was great.
We'll definitely have you back on again soon. Things are about to. Spidey's status quo is going to change soon because he's getting a brand new writer on Amazing, a new writer on Spectacular. He's going to get his black costume soon. So when you come back, things will be completely different. So it's going to be interesting.
Cool.
So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and Josh, yeah, for sure. And Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, we also want to thank you guys for listening to the show. It really helps when you leave us a review over on Apple Podcast, or you can drop us a line at HCT Spidercast on Twitter. You can find us at the Comic Book Syndicate pretty much anywhere else. But if you're looking for the podcast itself, we actually have like a new account or name, I guess. We are just Here Comes the Spidercast, pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. So, please keep in touch. We want to know what you guys think about the issues that we're reading about and the podcast itself. So let's keep that conversation going.
That's right, and we drop a new episode every week, covering usually 1 month's worth of Spider-Man comics from the 80s. So until next Monday, this has been Here Comes the Spidercast.
All right, see you then.